Welcome to my humble abode, darlings. Come in out of the rain and get comfortable. I have a story to tell you, and I hope you enjoy. If you do, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. The Demon of the Flower by Clark Ashton Smith. Not as the plants and flowers of earth grow peacefully beneath a simple sun, were the blossoms of the planet Lo-Fi, coiling and uncoiling in double dawns, tossing tumultuously under vast suns of jade green and balas ruby orange, swaying and weltering in rich twilights, in aurora-curtained nights. They resembled fields of rooted serpents that dance eternally to an otherworldly music. Many were small and furtive, and crept viper-wise on the ground. Others were tall as pythons, rearing superbly in hieratic postures of the jeweled light. Some grew with single or dual stems that burgeoned forth into hydra heads, and some were frilled and festooned with leaves that suggested the wings of flying lizards, the pennant of fairy lances, the phylacteries of strange sardonytotalisms. Some appeared to bear the scarlet wattles of dragons, others were tongued as if with black flames or the colored vapors that issued with weird writhings from out of barbaric censers, and others still were armed with fleshy nets or tendrils, or with the huge blossom like bucklers, perforated in battle. All were equipped with venomous darts and fangs. All were alive, restless, and sentient. They were the lords of Lo-Fi, and all other life existed by their sufferance. The people of the world had been their inferiors from unrecorded cycles, and even the most primitive myths there was no suggestion that any other order of things had prevailed, and the plants themselves, together with the fauna and mankind of Lo-Fi, gave immemorial obsolescence to that supreme and terrible flower known as Vorquail, in which a tutelary demon, more ancient than the twin suns, was believed to have made its immortal avatar. The Vorqual was served by a human priesthood, chosen from amid the royalty and aristocracy of Lo-Fi, in the heart of the chief city, Lospar. In the equatorial realm, it had grown from antiquity on the summit of the high pyramids of sable terraces that loomed over the town, like the hanging gardens of some greater Babylon, crowded with the lesser but deadly floral forms. At the center of the broad apex, the Vorqual stood alone in a basin level with surrounding platforms of black mineral. The base was filled with compost, in which the dust of royal mummies formed an essential ingredient. The demon flower sprang from a bulb so encrusted with the growth of ages that it resembled a stone urn. Above this there rose the gnarled and mighty stalk that displayed in earlier times the bifurcation of a mandrake, but those halves had now grown together into a scaly, furrowed thing like the tail of some mystic sea monster. The stalk was variegated with hues of greening bronze and antique copper, with the livid blues and purples of fleshy corruption. It ended in a crown of stiff blackish leaves, banded and spotted with poisonous metallic white, and edged with sharp serrations as of savage weapons. From below the crown issued a long, sinuous arm, scaled like the main stem, and serpentining downward and outward to terminate in the huge upright bowl of bizarre blossom, as if the arm in sardonic fashion should hold out a hellish beggar's cup. Abhorrent and monstrous was the bowl, which, like the leaves, was legend to renew itself at intervals of 1,000 years. It smoldered with sullen ruby at the base. It lightened into zones of dragon's blood, into belts of the rose of infernal sunset. On the full swelling side, and it flamed at the rim to a hot yellowish carrot red, like the ichor of salamanders. To one who dares peer within, the cup was lined with sepulchre violet, blackening towards the bottom, pitted with a myriad of pores, streaked with turgent veins and sulphureous green, swaying in a low, lethal, hypnotic rhythm with deep and sibilation. The chorale dominated the city of Lospar and the world Lo-Fi. Below, on the tiers of the pyramid, the thronged ophidian plants kept time to this rhythm in their tossing and hissing, and far beyond Lospar, to the poles of the planet, and in all of its longitude, the living blossoms obeyed the sovereign tempo of the Volsquar. Boundless was the power exercised by this being over the people who, for want of a better name, I have called the humankind of Lo-Fi. Myriad and frightful were the legends that had gathered through eons about the Vorqual, and dire was the sacrifice demanded each year at the summer solstice by the demon, the filling of its proffered cup with the lifeblood of a priest or priestess, chosen from amid the assembled hierophants who passed before the Vorqual till the poised cup, inverted and empty, descended like a devil's mitre on the head of one of their number. Lunathai, king of the realms about Lospar and high priest of the Vorqual, was last, if not the first, of his race to rebel against the singular tyranny. There were dim myths of some primordial ruler who had dared to refuse the required sacrifice, and whose people, in consequence, had been decimated by a mortal war with the serpentine plants which obeyed the angry demon, had uprooted themselves everywhere from the soil, and had marched on the cities of Lo-Fi, slaying or vampirizing all who fell in their way. Luthini from childhood had obeyed implicitly and without question the will of the floral overlord, had offered the stated worship, had performed the necessary rites. To withhold them would have been blasphemy. He had not dreamt of rebellion till at the time of the annual choosing of the victim, and 30 suns before the date of his nuptials with Nala, the priestess of Vorqual, he saw the hesitant, inverted grail come down in deathly crimson on the fair head of his betrothed. A sorrowful consternation, a dark, sullen dismay which he sought to smother in his heart, was experienced by Lunathai. Nala gazed and resigned in a mystic inertia of despair, accepted her doom without question. But a blasphemous doubt formed itself surreptitiously in the mind of the king. Trembling at his own impiety, he asked himself if there was not some way in which he could save Nala, could cheat the demon of its ghastly tribute. To do this and escape with impunity to himself and his subjects, he knew that he must strike at the very life of the monster, which was believed to be deathless and invulnerable. It seemed impious even to wonder concerning the truth of his beliefs, which had long assumed the force of a religious tenet, and was held unanimously amid such reflections. Lunathai remembered an old myth about the existence of a neutral and independent being known as the Acolyth, a demon coeval with the Vorqual, and allied neither to man nor flower creature. This being was said to dwell beyond the desert of Afam, in the otherwise unpeopled mountains of the white stone above the habitat of the ophidian blossoms. In latter days no man had seen the Acolyth for the journey through Ihom was not lightly to be undertaken. But this entity was supposed to be immortal, and it kept apart and alone, meditating upon all things, but inferring never with their process. However, it was said to have given, in earlier times, valuable advice to a certain king who had gone forth from Lospar to its lair among the White Crags. In his grief and desperation, Lunathai resolved to seek the Ocklith and question it about the possibility of slaying the Vorqual. If by any mortal means the demon could be destroyed, he would remove from Lo-Fi the long-established tyranny whose shadow fell upon all things from the Sable Pyramid. It was necessary for him to proceed with utmost caution, to confide in no one, to veil his very thoughts at the times from the occult scrutiny of the Vorqual. In the interim of 5 days between the choosing of the victim and the consummation of the sacrifice, he must carry out his mad plan, unattended and disguised as simple hunter of beasts. He left his palace during the short 3-hour night of universal slumber and stole forth towards the desert of Aphom. In the dawn of the Balsi-Ruby sun, he had reached the pathless waste and was toiling painfully over its knife-sharp ridges of dark stone, like the waves of a mounting ocean, petrified in storm. Soon the rays of the green sun were added to those of the others, and Aphom became a painting inferno through which Lunithai dragged his way, crawling from scarp to glassy scarp, or resting at whiles in the colored shadows. There was no water anywhere, but the swift mirage gleamed and faded, and then shifted sand appeared to run like rills in the bottom of deep valleys. At setting of the first sun, he came within sight of the pale mountains beyond Aphom, towering like cliffs of frozen foam above the desert's dark sea. They were tinged with transient lights of azure, of jade and orange, in the going of the yellow-red orb, and the westward slant of its binary. Then the lights melted into beryl and tourmaline, and the green sun was regnant over all, till it too went down, leaving a twilight whose colors were those of sea-water. In the gloom, Lunathai reached the foot of the pale crags, and there, exhausted, he slept till the second dawn. Rising, he began his escalade of the white mountains. They rose bleak and terrible before him against the hidden suns, with cliffs that were like the sheer terraces of gods. Like the king who had preceded him in the ancient myth, he found a precarious way that led upward through narrow, broken chasms. At last he came to the vaster fissure, riving the heart of the White Range, by which it was alone possible to reach the legendary lair of the Ocklith. The chasm's beating walls rose higher and higher above him, shutting out the suns, but creating their whiteness a wan and deathly glimmer to illume his way. The fissure was such as might have been cloven by the sword of a macrocosmic giant. It led downward, steepening ever like a wound that pierced to the heart of Lo-Fi. Lunathai, like all of his race, was able to exist for prolonged periods without other nourishment than sunlight and water. He had brought with him a metal flask filled with aqueous element of Lo-Fi, from which he drank sparingly as he descended the chasm, for the White Mountains were waterless, and he feared to touch the pools and streams of unknown fluids upon which he came at intervals in the dark. Very wise. There were sanguine-colored springs that fumed and bubbled before him, to vanish in fathomless rifts, and brooklets of mercurial metal, green, blue, or amber, and wood beside him like liquescent serpents, then slipped away into the dark caverns. Acrid vapors rose from clefts in the chasm, and Lunathai felt himself among strange chemistries of nature, in this fantastic world of stone which the plants of Lo-Fi could never invade. He seemed to have gone beyond the Vorkal's grim, diabolical tyranny. At last he came to a watery pool, occupying almost the entire width of the chasm. In passing it, he was forced to scramble along a narrow, insecure ledge at one side. A fragment of the marble stone, breaking away beneath his footfall, dropped into the pools as he gained the opposite edge, and the hueless liquid formed and hissed like 1,000 vipers. Wondering as to its properties, and fearful of the venomous hissing which did not subside for some times, Lunathai hurried on, and came after an interval to the fissure's end. Here he emerged in the huge crater-like pit that was the home of the Ochlith. Fluted and columned walls went up to a stupendous height on all sides, and the sun of orange ruby, now at zenith, was pouring down a vertical cataract of gorgeous fires and shadows. Endorsed against the further wall of the pit, in an upright posture, he beheld that being known as the Ochlith, which had the likeness of a high cruciform pillar of blue mineral, shining with its own esoteric luster. Going forward, he prostrated himself before the pillar, and then, in accents that quavered with deep awe, he ventured to ask the desired oracle. For a while the oculus maintained aeon-old silence. Peering timidly, the king perceived the twin lights of the mystic silver that brightened and faded with a slow, rhythmic pulsation in the arms of the blue cross. Then, from the lofty, shining thing, there issued a voice that was like the tinkling of mineral fragments, tightly crashing together, but which somehow shaped itself into articulate words. "It is possible," said the Ochlith, "to slay the plant known as the Vorkwal, in which an elder demon has been its habitation. Though the flower has maintained millennial age, it is not necessarily immortal, for all things have their proper term of existence and decay, and nothing has been created without its corresponding agency of death. I do not advise you to slay the plant, but I can furnish you with the information which you desire. In the mountain chasms through which you came to seek me, there flows a hueless spring of mineral poison, deadly to all ophidian plant life of this world." The Ochlith went on and told Lunathai the method by which the poison should be prepared and administered. The chill, toneless, tinkling voice concluded, "I have answered your question. If there is anything more that you wish to learn, it would be well to ask me now." Prostrating himself again, Lunathai gave thanks to Ochlith, and considering that he had learned all that was requested, he did not avail himself of the opportunity to question further the strange entity of living stone, and the Ochlith, cryptid and aloof, in its termless, impenetrable meditation, apparently saw fit to vouchsafe nothing more except in answer to a direct query. Withdrawing from the marble-walled abyss, Lunathai returned in haste along the chasm, till he reached the pool of which the Ochlith had spoken. He paused to empty his water-flask and fill it with the angry, hissing liquid. Then he returned his journey homeward. At the end of 2 days, after incredible fatigues and torments in the blazing hell of Apham, he reached Lospar, in the time of darkness and slumber, as when he had departed. Since his absence had been announced, it was supposed that he had retired to the underground Aditya, below the pyramid of Vorkwal, for purposes of prolonged meditation, as was sometimes his wont. In alternate hope and trepidation, dreading the miscarriage of his plan and shrinking still from its audacious impiety, Lunathai awaited the night preceding that double dawn of summer solstice, where, in a secret room of the Black Pyramid, the monstrous offering was to be made ready. Nala would be slain by a fellow priest or priestess, chosen by lot, and her lifeblood would drip from the channeled altar into the great cup, and the cup would be borne with solemn rites to the Vorkwal, and its contents poured into the evilly supplicant bull of the sanguined Blossom. He saw little of Nala during the interim. She was more withdrawn than ever, and seemed to have consecrated herself wholly to the coming doom. To no one, and least of all his beloved, did Lunathai dare to hint a possible prevention of the sacrifice. There came the dreadful eve with a swift, changing twilight of jeweled hues, and turned into darkness hung with auroral flame. Lunathai stole across the sleeping city and entered the pyramid, whose blackness towered massively amid the fragile architecture of buildings that were little more than canopies and lattices of stone. With infinite care and caution, he made the preparations prescribed by the Ochlith. Into the huge sacrificial cup of black metal, in a room lit with stored sunlight, he emptied the seething, subliant poison he had brought with him from the White Mountains. Then, opening adroitly a vein of one of his arms, he added a certain amount of his own fluid to the lethal portion, above whose forming crystals it floated like a magic oil, without mingling, so that the entire cup to all appearances was filled with the liquid most acceptable to the satanic Blossom. Bearing in his hand the black grail, Lunathai ascended a hewn stairway that led to the Vorkwal's presence, his heart quailing, his senses swooning in chill gulfs of terror. He emerged on the lofty summit above the shadowy town. In a luminous azure gloom against the weird and iridescent streamers of light that foreran the double dawn, he saw the dreamy sway of the monstrous plant, and heard its solemning hissing that was answered drowsily by myriad blossoms on the tiers below. A nightmare oppression, black and tangible, seemed to flow from the pyramid and to lie in stagnant shadow on all the lands of Lo-Fi. Aghast at his own temerity, and deeming that his shrouded thoughts would surely be understood as he drew nearer, or that the Vorkwal would be suspicious of an offering brought before the accustomed hour, Lothai made obedience to his floral suzerain. The Vorkwal vouchsafed no sign that it had deigned to perceive his presence, but the great flower cup with its flaring crimson, dulled to garnet and purple in the twilight, was held forward as if in readiness to receive the hideous gift. Breathless and fainting with religious fear, in a moment of suspense that seemed eternal, Lunathai poured the blood-mantled poison into the cup. The venom boiled and hissed like a wizard's brew as the thirsty flower drank it up, and Lunathai saw the scaled arm draw back, tilting its demon grail quickly as if to repudiate the doubtful draught. It was too late, for the poison had been absorbed by the Blossom's porous lining. The tilting motion changed in midair to an agonized writhing of the reptilian arm, and then the Vorkwal's huge, scaly stalk and pointed leaf crown began to toss in deathly dance, waving darkly against the auroral curtains of morn. Its deep hissing sharpened to an insupportable note, fraught with the pain of a dying devil, and looking down from the platform edge on which he crouched to avoid the swaying growth, Lunathai saw that the lesser plants on the terrace were now tossing in mad unison with their master. Like noises in an ill dream, he heard the chorus of their torturous sibilations. He dared not look again at the Vorkwal till he became aware of a strange silence, and saw that the blossoms below had ceased to writhe, and were dropping limply on their stems. Then, incredulous, he knew that the Vorkwal was dead. Turning in triumph mingled with horror, he beheld the flaccid stalk that had fallen prone on its bed of unholy compost. He saw the sudden writhing of the stiff, sordid leaves of the gross and hellish cup. Even the stony bulb appeared to collapse and crumble before his eyes. The entire stem, its evil colors fading swiftly, shrank and fell in upon itself like a sere, empty serpent skin. At the same time, in some obscure manner, Luthai was still aware of a presence that brooded above the pyramid. Even in the death of the Vorqual, it seemed to him that he was not alone. Then, as he stood and waited, fearing he knew not what, he felt the passing of a cold and unseen thing in the gloom, a thing that flowed across his body like the thick coils of some enormous python. Without sound, in dark, clammy undulations, a moment more and it was gone, and Lunathai no longer felt the brooding presence. He turned to go, but it seemed that the dying night was full of unconceived terror that gathered before him as he went down the long, somber stairs. Slowly he descended. A weird despair was upon him. He had slain the Vorqual. He had seen it wither in death. Yet he could not believe the thing he had done. The lifting of the ancient doom was still no more than an idle myth. The twilight brightened as he passed through the slumbering city. According to custom, no one would be abroad for another hour. Then the priests of the Vorqual would gather for the annual blood offering. Midway between the pyramid and his own palace, Lunathai was more than startled to meet the maiden Nala. Pale and ghostly, she glided by him with a swift and swaying movement, almost serpentine, which differed oddly from her habitual languor. Lunathai dared not accost her when he saw her shut, unheeding eyes, like those of a somnambulist, and he was awed and troubled by the strange ease, the unnatural surety of her motion, which reminded him of something which he feared to remember. In a turmoil of fantastic doubt and apprehension he followed her, threading the exotic maze of Lospar with the fleet and sinuous glider of a homing serpent. Nala entered the sacred pyramid. Lunathai, less swift than her, had fallen behind, and he knew not where she had gone into the myriad vaults and chambers. But a dark and fearsome intuition drew his steps without delay to the platform of the summit. He knew not what he should find, but his heart was drugged with an esoteric hopelessness, and he was aware of no surprise when he came forth in the varicolored dawn and beheld the thing which awaited him. The maiden Nala, or that which he knew to be Nala, was standing at the basin of evil compost above the withered remains of the Vorqual. She had undergone, was still undergoing, a monstrous and diabolical metamorphosis. Her frail, slight body had assumed a long and dragon-like shape, and the tender skin was marked off in insipid scales that darkened momentarily with a mottling of baleful hue. Her head was no longer recognizable as such, and the human lineaments were flaring into a weird semicircle of pointed leaf buds. Her lower limbs had joined together, had rooted themselves in the ground. One of her arms was becoming part of the reptilian bowl, and the other was lengthening into scaly stems that bore the dark red bud of a sinister bloom. More and more the monstrosity took on the similitude of the Vorqual, and Lunathai, crushed by the ancient awe and dark, terrible faith of his ancestors, could feel no longer any doubt of its true identity. Soon there was no trace of Nala in the thing before him, which began to sway with a sinuous, python-like rhythm, and to utter a deep and measured syllabation, to which the plants on the lower tier responded. He knew then that the Vorqual had returned to claim its sacrifice and preside forever above the city Lospar and the world Lo-Fi. So quoth this raven. Clark Ashton really likes to use very intricate words that people don't use anymore, which makes narrating very difficult. But nevertheless, he does have that Lovecraft magic. So, I hope you enjoyed, my darlings. Bye-bye. My darlings, it means so much to me that you come and listen to my little stories. I so appreciate it, but if you did like it, please feel free to hit the like button and subscribe so you can come back and hear more. My dearest thanks to my supporters, past and present. It means so much to me. Have a lovely day, my darling.